Ever, like, crack open your computer and wonder, like, what's even going on in this thing?
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're looking at today.
It's a whole world in there.
It really is.
Like a hidden city.
On today's deep dive, we are talking disk partitions.
Yeah.
The unsung heroes of data organization.
Keeping everything where it belongs.
We've got excerpts from a text that really breaks down how operating systems work at their core.
At the very, very base level.
And trust me, it's a lot more interesting than it sounds.
Way more interesting.
So to get us started,
Yeah. What's the best way to explain this?
picture this. You got a fresh, delicious pie.
Okay.
You wouldn't just dig in with a spoon, would you?
Oh, no. You got to cut that up.
Exactly.
You got to have some slices.
You got to slice it up.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what disk partitions do. They divide your computer's hard drive, or SSD, into these organized sections.
Technically speaking, a partition is a logical division of your physical storage device.
Okay.
And each of those partitions, it acts as its own container.
Okay.
Makes it much easier for your computer to manage and access your files.
So it's not just about being tidy.
It's way more than being tidy. Think
Wow.
about if you had like a million photos and you just threw them all into one folder.
Oh my God.
Good luck finding anything.
It would be impossible.
It'd be a nightmare.
So this is like giving it...
Yeah, it's giving your operating system a roadmap saying, hey, your photos are over here.
Okay.
Your documents are over here. So it can just go directly to that place and find what it needs.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, our source mentions raw and cooked partitions.
Yeah.
I'm hoping this involves actual pie, but I'm doubting it.
Sorry to disappoint no pie here.
Okay.
But you can think of cooked partitions as the ones that are ready for you to use.
Okay.
They have what's called a file system on them.
Okay.
So it's like the organizational structure. That's where you're going to put your documents, your photos, all the stuff that you access regularly.
All right, so what about the raw ones?
So raw partitions, they don't have a standard file system.
So they're like unbaked dough.
Exactly. They're not quite ready for prime time.
Okay.
They're often reserved for very specific tasks.
So they just kind of hang out in the background being mysterious?
Not necessarily. They're more like specialized workers.
Okay.
So a really good example is something called swap space.
What is swap space?
It's like extra memory that your computer can tap into when it's running a lot of programs.
Okay.
If you've ever like opened a million tabs in your web browser
Oh, yeah.
and your computer just grinds to a halt,
Yeah.
it's probably dipping into that swap space.
And that's because it's like running low on that extra memory.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's one of the things that raw partitions are really good for.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And also things like databases.
Okay.
Databases, sometimes they like to handle their data their own way for faster access and stuff like that.
So even though I don't see it, it's working.
It's working behind the scenes.
Okay.
Keeping things moving.
It's like the stage crew of a concert.
There you go.
They're essential, but we don't see them. All right, so we've got our pie, we sliced it up, we got our cooked partitions ready for our files, our raw ones doing their thing in the background.
Right.
But how does your computer actually boot up
Yeah.
and know what to do with all this?
It's not magic.
Yeah,
It can feel like magic.
it does.
Especially when you've worked on a computer and it's not working.
Yeah.
And then you fix it and you're like, how did that even happen?
What did I even do?
Exactly.
So this is where something called the bootloader comes in.
Yeah, the bootloader is a really small but important piece of software.
Bootloader. Sounds important.
It's like the brain of your computer when it starts up.
Okay.
So in those first few seconds after you hit the power button, what's it doing?
Yeah.
What's going on?
What is going on?
So imagine like a conductor stepping up onto the podium at an orchestra concert.
Okay.
And before the music starts, the conductor has to make sure that all the musicians are ready, all their instruments are tuned, everyone knows what they're supposed to be playing.
Gotcha.
That's kind of what the bootloader is doing for your computer.
So it's coordinating everything?
It's coordinating everything.
Okay.
It's identifying the operating system on your hard drive. It's figuring out where that is on your boot partition.
Yeah.
It's loading it into memory, and then it steps aside and lets the operating system take over.
Wow. So without the bootloader,
Without the bootloader, nothing.
computer doesn't work.
Blank screen.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's it.
Our source also mentions something called a bootstrap loader.
Yeah.
Is that the same thing or is that different?
Yeah. So those terms are used interchangeably a lot.
Uh,
But technically, the bootstrap loader is a smaller, even more fundamental program.
even more bare bones.
Even more bare bones. Like, its only job is to load the bootloader.
It's like programs all the way down.
Programs all the way down.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this all happens when I hit the power button.
In that split second that you hit the power button?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is all happening.
That's incredible.
It really makes you appreciate how complex these things are
It really does.
and how much has to happen for it just to turn on.
Yeah, speaking of complexity, our source also talks about dual booting,
Yeah.
like having two different operating systems on your computer.
Right, so if you want to have Windows and Linux
Yeah.
on the same computer,
How does that work?
you need a bootloader that can understand that.
Okay.
So going back to our conductor analogy, imagine that the conductor can speak multiple languages,
Oh, okay.
right? And they have to communicate with musicians from different countries, all speaking their own language.
So the bootloader is like translating.
The bootloader is translating. It's understanding this file system from Linux, this file system from Windows. I know what to do with each of them.
So you can choose when you turn on your computer. Do I want Windows today or do I want Linux today?
Exactly. It'll usually give you like a little menu.
Okay.
When you boot up the computer, it'll say which operating system you want to use.
So it's like two separate apartments
There you go.
in one building.
You got your Windows apartment, you got your Linux apartment. You can go to whichever one you want.
And they each have like their own key and their own layout, and they're totally self-contained.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's all thanks to the magic of partitions and the bootloaders.
Wow. Really cool stuff. Okay, so our computer's all booted up thanks to our bootloaders. We've got our partitions all organized.
Right.
But how do we actually access our files?
Yeah, how do we get to the good stuff?
Exactly.
This is where mounting comes in.
Mounting, like a hunting trophy on the wall.
Not quite. Though I guess it could feel like a trophy when you finally get your files to show up.
Okay, so not a hunting trophy. What are we talking about here?
It's more like, think of it like this. You have a treasure chest
Okay,
full of your digital photos from like your last vacation.
gotcha.
You want to look at those photos, so you open the chest and you can see them all, right?
Yeah.
Mounting is kind of like opening that treasure chest, but for your files.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So like I plug in my external hard drive, my computer recognizes it.
Right.
What's happening there?
So behind the scenes, your operating system is analyzing that drive.
Okay.
It's checking out the file system, making sure that it understands how everything is organized.
Look at digital handshake.
Exactly. Once it gives, okay, it's basically creating like a temporary access point.
Okay.
So now those photos on your external hard drive, they just pop up right there on your computer.
So it's like giving that external drive a backstage pass to all my other files.
There you go. A backstage pass just for a little while.
It's just for the night.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's temporary, which is important.
I imagine this whole mounting thing. This is where I've run into those like file corrupted error messages.
Oh yeah, for sure.
What's going on there?
So remember how your operating system checks the file system while it's mounting?
Yeah.
It's really, really meticulous about it. It's like a super strict bouncer at a club.
So no sneaking past this guy.
No way. And if
Yeah.
something even looks a little bit off, you get that error message.
So better safe than sorry.
Exactly.
Especially when it comes to my data.
Your data is important. You don't want to mess around with that.
Now, our source mentions some differences between like Windows and UNIX systems.
Yeah, they both handle this whole mounting thing a bit differently.
Okay, I'm curious. Tell me more.
So in Windows, you've got your drive letters right.
Yeah, like CD.
Exactly. That's directly tied to how they do mounting.
Okay.
Each partition gets its own little letter, like a VIP room in the club.
With a little sign on the door.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, UNIX systems, they're like, nah, we're doing things differently.
How so?
They use what's called a hierarchical file system, so it's more like a big tree with branches and all sorts of little subdirectories.
So instead of a VIP room, it's like finding your place on the right branch.
Pretty much. And the new files, they just kind of blend right in.
Interesting. So different approaches, but the same goal.
Exactly. It's all about making sure you can access those files.
This has been so cool, like going behind the scenes of how computers work.
Right. It's amazing how much complexity is involved in just opening a file or turning on your computer.
Really makes you appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive today.
I think so.
It's been so fascinating exploring these concepts.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Always a pleasure. And to our listeners out there, keep those hard drives spinning and those file systems happy.
And keep exploring. There's a whole lot more to discover in the world of tech.
Until next time, stay curious, everyone.